Hi everyone, I'm Karen MacNeil and this is WineSpeed.com's People to Know, insider interviews with the most important and fascinating people in the wine business. And today we're here with Pam Starr, who is the co-owner and winemaker for Crocker Starr. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, good to be here.
Yeah, so usually when we do these interviews, we talk a little bit about what happened early in your career first. But I was just noticing that Crocker Starr is 25 years old now.
Almost.
Yes, my goodness. What does that mean to you personally?
It means that I've been doing this for a while,
Yeah.
first and foremost. But I think when we do hit our 25th, it gives pause for reflection. I mean, the whole big pause is how did we get here? Where are we going?
Yeah.
Because 25 is a good marker. I remember turning 25 a million years ago, and I gave myself a quarter century party. And then when I turned 50, I blew it out at a half century. So I think I'll follow that theme with the company.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when you did begin, you began very humbly. You dragged those hoses and worked as a lab technician and worked in production. Was one of those roles especially helpful when you became a winemaker?
So many things that I did in this business, starting in 1984, really helpful to actually writing my first business plan. All of it. I'm a hands-on, I'm a seeing, believing, touching, tasting. If I didn't see it, I don't totally believe it. Probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because as a last of the boomers, I was not given a lot of instruction in mechanics.
Yeah.
And so one of the first jobs I did was take apart a piece of equipment that I had no clue what it did. Well, I had a sort of a clue, but not much. I took it all apart, cleaned it, and put it all back together. And the test for me is that it worked perfectly when I turned the machine on. And I think that in itself is sort of a template for what I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think of you as a very hands-on person, and I think when I first met you was when you were at Spottswoode, perhaps, and you followed the famous Tony Soter and Klein, and who were big, had very definitive points of view and pretty big personalities. And I'm wondering how a winemaker, and of course then Spottswoode itself had a point of view, right? How does a winemaker both honor what has gone before, but on the other hand, forge their own style and path?
Good question. I think when you have a winery where there's a template already laid, there's a lot of respect about history, because wine is history. And I think there's respect for the owners who hire you to carry on the tradition. But not everybody has the whole picture vision. So winemaking predecessors lay great road, but the road is long, and the road is not straight, because agriculture is not straight and Mother Nature is not straight. And that's, I think, brings a whole really special population of people to the wine business.
Yeah.
So I think paying homage and respect to the land and respect to the owners it allowed me to remove myself and try to see the path of what was in my term.
Yeah. And of course then there's the vineyard itself too, which you also in a sense have to respect, and it has its own voice as well.
Absolutely. It's the best thing that a winemaker can pay attention to. It's removing yourself from, so if you're going to be a terroirist, and especially in estate wine, and build from what I would call a classic template, one that I think lends longevity and collectability to a wine, you get to remove yourself and you get to study the dirt. And I think the dirt just speaks volumes. If you pay attention to streaks and stripes and changes, you also can sort of treat or view those sections of vines individually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, that sort of leads us to the idea of almost spirituality in wine. And I've heard you talk about ideas like talking to the vines and how much you are moved by them and the idea that they might have a life form or a pulse even. Talk about that for a minute, about spirituality in winemaking and in viticulture.
Spirituality is definitely a component. Mother Nature, this is an agricultural business, and we're not row croppers, and we don't flip dirt and flip crops. We, as viticulturists and wine growers, winemakers, we have a long marathon of creation. And so being a part of the soil and understanding what that's going to do and watching it express through the vine and through the grape. So the spirituality of the business comes through the vine for me. Each vine, so for instance, the color of the bark on vines. In a really alive vineyard, one that has a lot of organics and sustainability to it, there is a color of Cabernet Franc vines that's almost has a silver hue. So the next time you're in a vineyard, stand there and ask yourself, is there energy? Look at the trunk. Cabernet Sauvignon vines have a deeper, richer trunk color than the Cabernet Franc vines do. So I think spirituality lends itself to knowing that there is a growing, energized plant expressing the ground that it's grown in next to you.
Yeah. Well, even those of us who garden, and I'm certainly not a master gardener, but you can really tell when a plant is happy. I mean, it doesn't, you don't have to be expert at gardening to sort of see that. They do express themselves. Yeah. I read that as a younger woman, you once did a spice tasting of the spices in your mother's kitchen cabinets. And I think you were a flavor chemist of some kind. So do you think that it's important to be able to name flavors in a wine, specifically spices, berries, whatever they are?
Well, I think for people like us, Karen, I think it's really important. I mean, you've brought vocabulary to us, which, of course, some of my favorite words, unfruitedness, non-fruitedness, which is one of my favorite, and garrigue, which is a resurrection word, which I try to use as often as I possibly can. Thank you so much. But for everybody who's tasting wine, I don't think it's important necessarily to be able to say the difference between black cherry and big red Bing cherry.
Right.
I think the most important aspect of tasting wine as a wine collector, wine buyer, wine drinker is your first immediate guttural response. You have to have a sense of movement from the wine. So the wine, if it moves you, which your mouth, it's great. I mean, I almost went to dental school. The mouth is really, there's a lot of stuff going on in here, right? I think you don't have to have a word to go with it, though everybody I meet would like to have a few more words. And I think because of you, you've brought words to wine. Well, so thank you for that. Thank you for doing all the things you do.
Well, speaking of words, though, one of the fascinating areas with words, and I know I think you feel this way too, are those aromas and tastes that on the one hand seem very compelling, but they almost seem disgusting at the same moment, right? I mean, and I'm sometimes reluctant to write about concepts that sound bad on paper, but actually taste good. I don't know, baby throw up in Pinot Noir or something, right? Pinot Noir, baby throw up. I mean, it's right there. Very lactic-y.
I don't know. I mean, depends on the baby, right? Then it goes further than that. So we should probably not go down that rabbit hole. But I do believe that there are descriptors that you can use. So for instance, horse hoof. When I was little, and I think you might have eaten the same thing as I did, but there was this big jar of big white paste when I was in first grade, and I got kicked out of kindergarten, so I had to go right to first grade. Who knew? It's a lifelong journey. So that big tub of white paste, it was made from horse remains. At the time, horse hooves and stuff like that. So
Glue, right.
Yeah, it was delicious. It was delicious. And I remember those tastes from my childhood. So I think putting horse paste down, I have watched the young people, young tasters, and used some of these words on them, and I just watched the confusion. So it's more fun for me to use horse paste and watch their expression than it is to you know, really go dark 30 on that. And I think that there are other important descriptors we use in production. So if something smells like Ramos Fizz egg foam, it's a very pleasant way of saying something's about ready to go reduced. And so we have some yeast that maybe are struggling and they're unhealthy. We use other words like rotten egg, garlic, onion, armpit. Okay, those are things that we can affect change as vintners. Some of the ones that we can't when they're post a secondary yeast fermentation would be things like woolly dog or, you know, like serious barnyard. Horse hoof is gentle. Like when you start going deep into some of these other tertiaries, you get out of the California realm of acceptability. You get into the old world, which I think frustrates me a little bit because I think some of those descriptions should be allowable and charming in the new world as they are as much in the old world. But we'll get there. We'll get there as a wine community.
I think so too. And you know, if you think about all the other things in our lives, sometimes daily lives, that don't smell exactly antiseptic. I mean, coffee, cheese, these are not cleaned up kinds of aromas. These are kind of corrupt aromas. So maybe we just need a little more corruption in our vocabulary to describe them.
I have been in a car traveling down 880 on the way to the Oakland airport, and you go by the bread bakery. Of course, it smells so good, and the next thing you know, you're like, is there a coffee company nearby? Well, that's a skunk.
Yes.
Right? And just at that right aroma level, and is that a coffee roastery? No, that's a dead skunk on the road. So those are fun.
Yeah. Now, you know, the last 5 years in particular for Crocker and Starr, you've had a lot of good attention, and I know they've been really personally terrific years for you. What do you think, what's been a highlight in that time?
I think building a winery and actually moving into our own house. It's great to be out there in the world of custom crush, but I was ready to employ a few other fermentation techniques, and I just needed to have some quiet. I just needed to have some space. I think that was pivotal for me. About the same time, we started getting some really wonderful talk on all channels, so social media became a really big deal for us. And the writers have been always very gracious to us as well. And then our membership started drinking all of our wine. So I'd say the last 5 years are the culmination, successful culmination of the previous 20.
Very nice. Well, our complete interview with Pam Starr appears on winespeed.com's People to Know page. Check it out. I think you'll really like it.